The first time my son publicly called me confused. 40 people turned to look at me like I had lost my mind. I was wearing the same navy suit I'd worn to bury my wife 3 years earlier. What nobody standing in that backyard knew was that I was carrying a plain white envelope inside my jacket, an envelope that could destroy everything my son had spent 8 years building. I almost handed it to him the moment I arrived. I should have, because before that party was over, he would make me wish I'd never accepted his invitation. 3 days earlier, Michael had called me. "Dad," he said cheerfully, "we're having a little family celebration on Saturday. You have to come." "What are we celebrating?" "The business. We've hit a huge milestone." I smiled. I wouldn't miss it. For the rest of the week, I thought about how proud Eleanor would have been. My wife had always believed Michael would build something special. Even during the years when he doubted himself, even when nobody else did. Saturday afternoon, I stood in front of my hallway mirror adjusting my tie. The navy suit still fit, a little looser than before. Abinge has a way of shrinking a man without asking permission. I straightened my collar the way Eleanor used to. "You still don't know how to do that." She'd always tease. I smiled at my reflection. "You'd probably fix it anyway." For a second, I almost stayed home. Something didn't feel right. I couldn't explain it. Maybe it was because this was the first big family gathering since Eleanor passed away. Maybe I simply missed having someone tell me not to overthink things. Instead, I picked up the envelope from the kitchen table. It wasn't thick, just a few papers, and something Michael never expected I'd still have. I slipped it inside my jacket. Not yet, I told myself. I'll give it to him after the celebration. Michael's house in Scottsdale was already full when I arrived. Nearly 40 people filled the backyard, neighbors, business associates, friends, Laura's family, people I'd never met. Soft music drifted across the pool, while servers carried trays of drinks between small groups. It looked like success, the kind of success every father hopes his child will find. Michael spotted me almost immediately. "Dad!" He walked over with a wide smile and hugged me tightly. For one brief moment, he felt like my little boy again. "I'm glad you made it. I told you I would." Then his eyes dropped toward my jacket, toward the envelope. "What have you got there?" "Something for you." For just a fraction of a second, his smile disappeared. Then it returned. "We'll do that later." His answer was quick, almost too quick. I nodded. "Of course." As he walked away, I instinctively touched the envelope through my jacket. Still there. Still waiting, if I'd opened it right then. Everything that happened afterward might have been different, but fathers spend their whole lives believing there's always a better moment. Sometimes there isn't. Laura greeted me with a kiss on the cheek. Sophie ran over and threw her arms around me. "Grandpa!" She nearly knocked my drink out of my hand. I laughed. "I brought you something." I handed her the silver bracelet I'd bought for her 16th birthday. She slipped it onto her wrist immediately. "I love it. It looks like something your grandmother would have picked." She smiled. "Then I'll never take it off." For a little while, I forgot about the envelope. I forgot about the strange feeling I'd had all morning. I simply watched my family laughing together. Michael moved from guest to guest like a man who owned the world. And maybe he did, after all. I'd helped him build it. 8 years earlier, he'd sat across from me at my kitchen table with tears in his eyes, convinced he'd failed his family. Without hesitation, I'd emptied my retirement account, $85,000 every penny. I never asked for interest. I never demanded repayment. I only wanted my son to have another chance. Watching him laugh beside the pool, I told myself it had all been worth it. I had no idea that in less than an hour, my own son would convince an entire backyard that I was losing my mind. For nearly an hour, everything felt normal. Michael introduced me to investors. Neighbors shook my hand. People congratulated him on the company's success. I couldn't have been prouder. Every now and then, my hand brushed against the envelope inside my jacket. Still there. Still waiting. Not yet, I told myself. After the speeches. That seemed like the right moment. I had no idea. The speeches were about me. Around 4 o'clock, Michael picked up a spoon and gently tapped the side of his glass. Clink, the conversations faded. The music stopped. People slowly turned toward him. Servers froze where they were standing. Someone carrying a tray of drinks stopped in the middle of the patio. Michael wrapped one arm around Laura's waist and smiled. "I just want to thank everyone for being here today." Applause broke out across the backyard. I smiled too. My chest filled with pride. This was his moment. I'd watched him fight for years to build this business. He deserved every bit of success. He thanked his employees, his partners, his friends. He even thanked Laura for believing in him. Then his eyes found mine. For a second, I thought he was about to thank me too. Instead, his smile faded. "There are also people," he said carefully, "who've made this journey much harder than it ever needed to be." The applause stopped. I frowned. Maybe he was talking about a competitor, a difficult client, someone else. Then he looked directly at me. "Dad." A strange silence settled over the yard. I felt dozens of eyes shift in my direction. "What is it?" I asked with a nervous laugh. Michael sighed as if this conversation exhausted him. "Please don't make this difficult." A few guests exchanged confused glances. I laughed again. Only this time, it didn't sound like laughter. "What are you talking about?" He looked around before speaking, almost as though he wanted everyone to witness what came next. "You've been calling my clients." My smile disappeared. "What? You've been telling people things about me?" "No." His voice grew louder. "Yes, you have. I've never called your clients. You've questioned my finances. No. You've told people you helped build this company. I did help build it." The words slipped out before I could stop them. A murmur spread through the crowd. Someone whispered. Another person slowly lowered their drink. A little girl standing near the dessert table looked back and forth between us, without understanding why the adults had suddenly gone quiet. Even the breeze seemed to disappear. Michael rubbed his forehead dramatically. "This is exactly what I'm talking about." I stared at him. "Michael," he interrupted me. "Dad, you're 71. The number landed like a punch. You have to let go. I don't understand." "No, that's the problem." People weren't looking at me with anger anymore. They were looking at me with something worse. Pity. Michael lowered his voice just enough that everyone had to lean in to hear. "I think you're getting confused." The sentence echoed inside my head. Confused. For a moment, I honestly wondered if I'd heard him correctly. Then someone behind me whispered, "I heard he's been forgetting things lately." Another voice answered quietly, "Michael's mentioned it before." I slowly turned. Nobody met my eyes. Nobody denied saying it. My stomach dropped. This wasn't spontaneous. Those whispers, they sounded rehearsed, like seeds that had already been planted long before today. I looked back at my son. "Michael, please, Dad." He spoke gently now, the kind of gentle voice people use when they think an elderly person might become upset. "I don't want you embarrassing yourself." My hands started shaking. I hated that. Not because I was afraid. Because shaking hands make people believe whatever they're already prepared to believe. I clenched them behind my back. "I'm not confused." Michael closed his eyes and sighed. "I know this is hard for you." "No." I took one slow step toward him. "You listen to me." The entire backyard became silent. "You know exactly what you're doing." For the first time, something flashed across Michael's face. Not guilt, fear. It lasted less than a second. Then it disappeared. "I think it's time you stopped involving yourself in decisions that don't concern you anymore." There it was, the real message, not for me. For everyone watching, he wasn't defending himself. He was rewriting who I was. An old man who couldn't be trusted. I reached inside my jacket. My fingers touched the envelope. I could hand it to him now. I almost did. But something stopped me, not yet. Because suddenly, I realized this wasn't just humiliation. It felt planned, and I needed to know why. Then, Michael said the one sentence that hurt more than everything else. "You've become obsessed with money, Dad." The words hit me like ice water. Money. I'd emptied my retirement account for him. I'd helped him buy his first house. I'd paid medical bills when Sophie was born. I'd never once asked him to pay me back, yet somehow he'd convinced everyone that I was the greedy one. I looked around the yard, 40 faces. 40 silent witnesses. Not one of them knew the truth, not yet, and neither did I. But I was about to find out that this wasn't simply a son humiliating his father. It was something far more calculated, something that had begun long before I ever walked into that backyard. For a few seconds, nobody moved. The silence felt heavier than the Arizona heat. I looked at my son, then at the envelope inside my jacket. Maybe this was the moment. Maybe I should end this now. But something told me I still didn't understand what was really happening. So instead of opening the envelope, I asked one question. "Is that why you invited me?" Michael looked away, just for a second. That was all the answer I needed. He hadn't invited me to celebrate. He'd invited me to become the entertainment, to become the example, the old man everyone would pity. I slowly removed the envelope from my jacket. Every pair of eyes followed it. Michael swallowed. "What is that?" I held it out to him. "So, let's do it now." He hesitated before taking it. For the first time that afternoon, he didn't look confident. He looked nervous. He opened the envelope. Inside was a cashier's check, $15,000. His eyes widened. "What's this? Your mother's savings?" The backyard remained silent. She had an old account neither of us remembered. "I split the money equally between you and your sister." For a brief second, I saw shame cross his face. The little boy I'd raised was still in there somewhere. Then he noticed everyone watching. His expression hardened again. "I don't want it." I almost smiled. "That's the first time you've ever said no to money." A few people shifted uncomfortably. Someone quietly cleared their throat. Nobody laughed. Nobody spoke. I folded the check, placed it back inside the envelope, and slipped it into my jacket. "That's okay. I'll keep it." I looked around the backyard one last time. "I'm sorry I interrupted your celebration." I turned toward the gate. Behind me, I heard hurried footsteps. "Dad." Michael grabbed my arm before I reached my car. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Don't make a scene." I looked at him for a long moment. Then I gently pulled my arm free. "Michael, you already did." I got into my car and drove home. I didn't cry, honestly. That surprised me. I expected anger. I expected heartbreak. Instead, I felt empty. The kind of emptiness that comes when someone finally confirms the fear you've been refusing to believe. Back home, I hung the navy suit carefully over a chair. Eleanor's photograph smiled at me from the refrigerator. "You would have known something was wrong," I whispered. "You always did." I made myself a cup of coffee. It went cold before I took a second sip. Then one thought refused to leave me. Michael hadn't acted like a son who'd lost his temper. He'd acted like a man following a plan. Those whispers kept replaying in my head. Michael's mentioned it before. He's been forgetting things. No, those people hadn't come up with that idea on their own. Someone had planted it. Long before the party, I wish that had been the worst part. It wasn't. The next morning, I pulled out years of old bank records. By lunchtime, my hands were shaking, not because of my age, because of what I was finding. It wasn't just the original $85,000 I'd given Michael. Over the years, I'd quietly transferred money whenever he needed help. Business expenses, medical bills, mortgage payments, equipment, emergency loans. I added everything together, nearly $144,000. I'd never once asked for repayment. Then I found something buried inside an old folder. A signed agreement. I stared at it for several seconds. Then I read it again. The $85,000 had never been a gift. It was legally documented as a private loan, signed by both of us. I sat back in my chair. My heart began pounding. Why had Michael publicly called it a gift? Why accuse me of being obsessed with money, if the paperwork proved the exact opposite? That's when I realized the humiliation wasn't about protecting his reputation. It was about protecting a secret, and I had a feeling I'd only uncovered the first piece of it. The answer was waiting for me. I just didn't know how ugly it would be. I called an attorney the following morning. Her name was Margaret Lewis. She'd spent more than 30 years handling financial disputes, and within 5 minutes of meeting her, I realized she wasn't interested in comforting me. She was interested in facts. She read the loan agreement from beginning to end. Then she looked up. "Why haven't you enforced this?" I shrugged. "Because he's my son." She didn't respond. Instead, she slid the papers back across the desk. "That's not a legal answer." I looked down at my hands. "No, it isn't." Over the next week, Margaret reviewed every document I still had. Bank statements, transfer records, the loan agreement, imams, anything connected to Michael's business. Then she called. Her voice sounded different, more serious. "Richard, I think we've found the real problem." My stomach tightened. "What is it?" "There was nothing wrong with your memory." No. She paused. "I mean, someone wanted other people to believe there was." The room suddenly felt smaller. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying your son didn't just embarrass you. He prepared people to believe you." For a long moment, I couldn't speak. Margaret continued. "I interviewed several people connected to the company. Before the party, Michael had already been telling investors, employees, and even friends that you were becoming forgetful." I closed my eyes. "He told them you kept bringing up old financial arrangements. He said you were confusing loans with gifts. You sometimes forgot conversations." Every sentence felt heavier than the last. Then she added the one detail that made everything click. "So when he called you confused at the party, people already expected to hear it." I leaned back in my chair. The whispers, the pity, the way no one questioned him, it all made sense now. The party hadn't changed anyone's opinion of me. It had confirmed the opinion he'd been building for weeks, maybe months. I thought back to that woman whispering. "I heard he's been forgetting things lately." She hadn't invented that rumor, Michael had. The backyard wasn't a celebration, it was a stage, and I had walked onto it, without realizing I was the main performance. I wish that had been the end of it. It wasn't. Margaret kept reading. "There's something else." "What?" "Michael recently tried to sell his company." I frowned. "So?" The buyer's legal team started reviewing the financials records. My pulse quickened, and they found inconsistencies. "What kind?" She tapped the loan agreement. They couldn't verify whether the $85,000 was a loan or a forgiven gift. I stared at the document. "But we signed this." "Exactly." She nodded. "Which means Michael had a problem. If the loan was still active, it affected the company's financial position. If investors discovered it, the sale could be delayed, or even fall apart." Everything suddenly came together. The invitation, the speech, the accusations, the whispers. None of it had been emotional. It had been strategic. Michael wasn't protecting himself from embarrassment. He was protecting a business deal. And the easiest way to do that was to make everyone believe his 71-year-old father couldn't be trusted. I felt sick. Not because of the money, not because of the paperwork, because of the planning. My own son had looked at me and asked himself one question. How do I make people doubt my father before he ever tells the truth? That question hurt more than every insult he'd spoken at the party. Margaret quietly closed the file. "What do you want to do?" For a long time, I didn't answer. Part of me wanted to tear the papers apart and forget the whole thing. Another part wanted justice. Not revenge, just the truth. Finally, I looked at her. "Send the demand letter." She nodded. I already started drafting it. A week later, Michael called for the first time in years. He didn't sound confident. He sounded scared, and I knew something had changed. He hadn't called to apologize. He'd called because he finally realized the man he'd tried to convince everyone was confused still remembered everything. Michael called 3 days after my attorney sent the demand letter. His voice was calm. "Too calm, Dad. Can we talk?" I looked at the phone for a moment before answering. I think we've done enough talking. Please. There was something different in his voice. Not confidence, not anger, fear, real fear, against my better judgment. I agreed. 2 days later, he stood on my front porch for almost a full minute. He didn't knock. He just stood there staring at the door. The same door he'd walked through hundreds of times growing up. The same house where I'd taught him to ride a bicycle, helped him with homework, celebrated birthdays, buried dreams. Finally, he knocked. When I opened the door, he looked older than I remembered, not because of age, because stress had finally caught up with him. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside without saying a word. Neither of us spoke until we were sitting across from each other at the same kitchen table where, 8 years earlier, he'd asked me for help. Back then, he'd looked like a frightened son. Today, he looked like a man who had run out of excuses. He stared at his hands for several seconds, then quietly said, "I've been thinking about the party. I waited. I was wrong." Silence. I knew you weren't confused. That sentence hurt more than every insult he'd shouted in front of those 40 people, because it confirmed what I'd already suspected. He hadn't lost his temper. He'd made a choice. I knew exactly what I was doing. I looked out the kitchen window before asking the only question that mattered. Why? He rubbed his hands together. My business was falling apart. I know. I thought if people believed. He couldn't finish the sentence. If people believed what? That you were getting confused. Then no one would believe you if the loan ever came up. The room fell silent. Finally, he had said it. Out loud. No excuses, no pretending. Just the truth. "I told people you kept forgetting things." He swallowed hard. "I told them you mixed up gifts and loans. I even told Laura not to argue with me if you brought it up." I closed my eyes, every whisper, every strange look, every sympathetic smile. It had all been manufactured by my own son. "You know what hurts the most?" I finally asked. "The money?" I slowly shook my head. "No." "The lies?" "No." I looked him straight in the eyes. "You stole something much bigger than money." He frowned. "You stole my dignity. I spent 71 years earning people's respect. You tried to erase it in 10 minutes. His eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry, I know, I'll fix it." I gave a sad smile. "No, you'll spend the rest of your life trying. Whether you succeed isn't up to me." For the first time since he'd walked in, he cried, not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, like the little boy who used to hide behind his mother's legs whenever he got scared. I was terrified of losing everything. I nodded. "I believe you. I didn't know what else to do." "Yes, you did." He looked at me. "You could have told me the truth. You could have asked for help. You could have trusted the father who had never once abandoned you." He lowered his head. "I know, no," I gently interrupted. "Now you know." The legal process continued. Michael corrected the financial records. The loan was officially acknowledged. The company's sale eventually moved forward under new terms. He repaid every dollar he legally owed me. But something became painfully clear. Money returns. Trust doesn't. Trust has to be rebuilt. One decision at a time. Months passed. Michael called every week. Sometimes we spoke for 5 minutes, sometimes 20. There were long silences, awkward conversations, careful words. Exactly the way healing usually begins. Slowly, not dramatically, honestly. Eventually, Laura came to apologize too. She admitted she'd believed Michael because she wanted to believe her husband. I accepted her apology. But acceptance isn't the same thing as forgetting. Almost a year later, Michael invited me to another family gathering. I nearly said no. Then I remembered something Eleanor used to tell me. Don't let someone else's mistake decide the size of your life. So I went. This gathering was much smaller. No investors. No speeches. No performance, just family. Halfway through dinner, Michael stood up. For a second, my heart skipped. Old memories have a way of returning without permission. He raised his glass. "This is my father." He looked directly at me. The man who gave me more second chances than I deserved. Nobody spoke. I spent years trying to protect my reputation. I almost destroyed the person who gave me one. His voice cracked. I'll regret that for the rest of my life. Then he did something I never expected. He apologized. Not privately, publicly, in front of everyone. This time, there were no lies, no excuses, no performance. Just truth. I walked over, placed my hand on his shoulder and smiled. "Let's eat." He laughed. "So that's all you're going to say? You're lucky I'm saying anything." For the first time in a long time, we both laughed. Not because everything had been fixed, but because honesty had finally replaced pride. Later that evening, I found myself sitting alone beside the pool. Sophie walked over and sat beside me. "Grandpa? Yeah? I'm really glad you came." "So am I." She leaned her head against my shoulder. "You know, I've always been proud you're my grandpa." I smiled. "That's enough for me." Across the yard, I watched Michael laughing with his family. I didn't know what tomorrow would look like. None of us ever do. But I finally understood something I'd spent most of my life trying to learn. My son thought he could take my reputation away in front of 40 people. He was wrong. Because reputation belongs to other people, but dignity belongs to you. And no one, not even your own child, can take it unless you hand it over. If you've ever been made to feel like a burden by someone you loved, tell me your story in the comments. And subscribe for more emotional family stories.